2, 3, 4, 5. There is a quorum. And there's 19 seconds.
He may ask me to give some history. I only have 50 years. I had to ask Jerry. Jerry, how long you been here?
All right, going to call this meeting to order, the 6 o'clock work session. Tonight's 6 o'clock work session will be a presentation from the Levy District. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I would like to present Richard Lanning, President of the Board of Supervisors.
Oh, there he is.
Good evening, Mayor DeLong, members of City Council. Thank you for having us tonight. I appreciate it. I'm Richard Lanning. I serve in the capacity of President of NT Realty, one of the largest property owners in North Kansas City, and also in the capacity of President of the North Kansas City Levy District. So it's been a couple of years since we made a presentation to the City Council. We thought it was timely to come over here, new members on the council, new members and staff. So again, thank you for allowing us to be here. We have certain board members, myself, David Zimmer with Zimmer Companies, Ed Brown with Coleman Brown. We have our Secretary Treasurer, Legal Counsel, Jerry Brandt with Withers Brandt, Igo, and Mullinex. Jerry was telling me tonight that he has been working on the Levy District since 1972 and his firm a lot longer than that, prior to that. We have our district engineers, Leon Staub and Miranda Hamrick. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Leon and Miranda.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Thank you. So, Richard, this was supposed to be your slide. What? All right, how's that? All right, we'll start off with a discussion about the Board of Supervisors. Richard, Ed, and David are all here tonight. The board for the Levy District is comprised of 5 people. They are elected from the landowners of the Levy District. You actually have to be a property owner within the district to serve and vote on Levy District matters. Board members are elected based on the number of votes that they receive, and every property owner has has a number of votes proportional to their acreage.
Oh, wait, question.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but just to be clear, because this has come up before, when you say property owner, what are the minimum requirements to qualify as a property owner to have a vote?
Jerry, would you like to take that one?
Any property.
Very sorry.
Sure. Yes, any property, a residential lot, a vacant piece of property, any fee title. There's a tax book created, and we have a list of every piece of property. We check it every few years.
So I was going to follow up to that. I've been told it was a minimum of 1 acre to get 1 vote. Is there a partial
There's a
vote?
minimum. No, I think it goes into fractions, I believe.
Okay, because they're fractional. Okay, so I know that's a conversation that people had. I don't know.
I
a
can
couple
check
years
that, and I can report back to you. It really that hasn't come up for years, so I'll be happy to check back. But I believe all property owners are entitled to
Okay.
vote.
Thank you. Further questions on that? All right.
So this is the organization of the Levy District. I want you to keep in mind that the Levy District employs no full-time personnel. So we have the Board of Supervisors who are elected. We have the Secretary, which is Jerry Brandt. Jerry is also the attorney for the district. Burns & McDonnell, which is the firm that Miranda and I work for, we serve as the district engineers. And then we have the Levy District hires usually a part-time person to do levy security, and since Bill Hudson retired, that position is vacant. So the Levy District, or the levy, was originally constructed and founded back in 1908 by some of the landowners within North Kansas City. It was I believe, a loose affiliation of property owners who decided that they needed a levy to survive if they wanted to do business in North Kansas City. Starting around the mid-1940s, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers came in and started making upgrades to the levee system and building it to more modern engineering standards. Right after the levee was constructed, finished construction 1949, 1950, we had the 1951 flood. It did some damage, but the levee didn't fail, and the Corps came back in and did a redesign and some upgrades of the system. So around the 1954 timeframe was the last time the major capital improvements were done on the levee. With that, the levee district operates and maintains about 6.25 miles of levee, 3 closure structures, 3 under seepage collection systems, 31 relief wells, and 6 pump stations. And Miranda's going to talk to you those in a little bit more detail. So we'll throw some statistics up here because I think it really shows the importance of what the levee provides to this community and the reason why the board takes things so seriously. There are a total of about 3,000 acres that the levee protects here in North Kansas City, and it's comprised of about 1,800 properties, and 840 of those are residents. So in the daytime, there's about 27,000 people that are protected, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers estimates there's about $4.4 billion in infrastructure that's protected. We also pay very close attention the critical infrastructure that this levee system protects. Of course, you have all of your city facilities like your fire department, police department, water plant. We have the Murray Yard, which is a big regional global transportation hub, the downtown airport, the I-35 corridor, and of course the KCMO water treatment plant, which provides water to most of the metropolitan area.
Let's just, on that last slide, your outer boundary there around the airport. So that's operated by the separate levee district.
That's right.
And so there's no fees, there's no assessment just on the airport property that comes to the North Kansas City levee district, but that goes towards.
Pretty much. It's everything to the east of 169.
Okay, is what applies
Is within
okay,
within the district. So we have the levee unit, the North Kansas City
Yeah.
levee unit, which goes all the way around. It's the combination of the red and gray lines. And then the city of Kansas City, Missouri operates what's called the airport section, which
Okay.
is the gray line.
Thank you.
So the levee district is governed by about 3 main government agencies. First is the state of Missouri, and the administration of all the levee districts in Missouri is handled under Chapter 245 of the code, and that mainly pertains to the administration, how they're founded, how they can collect money, how they elect board members. So all of that is in the Missouri statute. The Circuit Court of Clay County also comes into play, and the Circuit Court is the entity that assigns the proportion of the maintenance tax to the property owners. The big one, of course, is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The levee was built and constructed by the Corps of Engineers to their standards. We have 2 primary pieces of legislation that we have to adhere to. One is the Navigation and Navigable Waters Act, and then the other one is the Corps' program for eligibility for rehabilitation assistance. And both of those laws really tell us how we have to operate and maintain the levee. If we don't operate and maintain things in the way that's acceptable to the Corps, if there's a flood and if there's damage to the levee system, we're not eligible for funding to get repairs. So it is always of the utmost importance to keep the levee maintained, to maintain our eligibility status. And then to a lesser degree is FEMA, because the levee impacts the city's flood insurance study. So We don't really have a lot of direct involvement, but what we do and how we operate the system impacts the amount of flood insurance that people have to pay if they're within the levee interior. So, any questions on that? Okay. All right, Miranda, you want to talk about some features?
Yeah, so as Leon mentioned, the levee is comprised of about 6¼ miles of earthen levee, with the riverside containing the riprap bank. And that is the majority of the levee system. There are a total of 6 pump stations that operate in conjunction with that earthen levee. 3 are owned by the levee district and were built by the Corps, and then 3 are owned by the city. They are inspected every 90 days by both Burns & McDonnell and city staff, and they do a great job doing that. All 6 pump stations are operated by the city, though. The city leases the 3 from the levee district. Each of those 6 pump stations has an outfall associated with them into the Missouri River. So there are 6 outfalls with the system, and each of those outfalls and pipes is inspected every 5 years per the Corps standards. So they send a camera through those and characterize any defects for repair. But the city of North Kansas City holds the MS4 permit for each of those outfalls into the Missouri River. So then there's the under Seepage Control Systems. There's 3 different ones. One is up on the north side by Perkins Levee across from the KCMO water treatment plant. And then 2 are along the south portion along the main stem at Harlem and National Starch, or what is now known as Ingredient. The 2 on the south consist of 31 relief wells that require well testing every 5 years as well, per the Corps standards. So those are due for testing in 2023. And then the Harlem under seepage system, which contains 25 of those relief wells, also has 2 portable pumps associated with it. So the water drains to one centralized location in Harlem, and then the portable pumps pump it up and over the levee back to the river. The levee district and the Corps built and realigned the Rock Creek Channel as part of the federal project. So the levee district also owns and maintains the Rock Creek Channel out to the Missouri River, which drains the water off the hillside drainage ditch. And then lastly is Hillside. So it runs along the bluff on the north side of North Kansas City, and drains all that water, and is an earthen levee with a few flood walls in between where the levee could not be constructed to full height due to property acquisition. So the short little flood walls help fill in the gaps. And then there's the BNSF closure structure. So it is a temporary wall through Murray Yard that's constructed in the event of a flood to prevent the flooding from getting into the city. It takes about 8 hours to set up this closure structure, and the use of heavy equipment and lots of manpower. And then there are also 2 closure structures along Hillside. One is at Cherry and one is at Holmes. And these are shorter closure structures that can be done all by hand, but they do help fill in a short gap at the roadways.
Any questions on the project features? Yeah, go ahead.
The one on Cherry Street, we've been doing some work on that one. Is that what I've seen up the hill, like right where the levee hits Cherry Street? Or is that something unrelated?
That wouldn't be us. That wouldn't be the levee district.
Okay, because there's been a lot of work going on just up Cherry Street, right where the levee, where that wall piece hits. I don't know if you guys were aware of that, but it might be, I think that's City of Kansas City ground, but that might have been going on for a month and a half. So if anybody's been up there to look at it, maybe check on, see what they did.
Generally, it's not a problem. There's just there's just a concrete sill that goes across the bridge, and we just need to be able to have a clean, flat space to put those stop logs up. So
Yep.
whatever they're doing with the road generally doesn't impact us.
Right. Okay, just making sure, because, my house is
Right up
right there. So, thanks.
All right. I'll get into a little bit of the finances for the district. So the way that it works, the district works as it's a benefit district. We call it a maintenance tax, but I think Jerry would tell us that it's not truly a tax. It's an assessed benefit. And so the way that it works is that the Clay County Court does an assessment of all the properties within the protected area and assigns them a benefit number. It's almost like a value. And then if you own a property, you're given an assessment, and then you take your number divided by the total, and that's your proportion of what the levy district sets as its annual income. So it's all based on proportion of the value of your property. And I believe the last time the court did an assessment was in 2008.
Is there a statutory period they have to do that, or
No.
what triggers that, I guess, then?
Well, we've tried to do it about every 10 years, but it's a very expensive process. We estimate the next time we do it, it'll probably cost us $100,000, which is probably 20% of our annual budget, which is pretty healthy expense. The problem is we go back to the court appoints 3 commissioners, they go out and check out all the property. Usually they accept the assessor's value on all property that's taxed, but there's a lot of property that isn't. Railroad property, school district property, city property, Kansas City's property, churches. So those commissioners that are appointed by the court get paid. We have to do 2 certified mailings to the 2,000 property owners or parcels. So it gets quite expensive, just the process. We've been waiting for the completion of the new development because they've it will go on forever. And if something isn't developed till the next year, they might get 12 years or 15 years with,
That's what I was going to ask. So basically, my understanding of what I've heard so far is once you get some of these built, that help you could reallocate
Right.
somewhat kind of what's being distributed everywhere to some of these other.
Right, and some others have tried to do something different. Birmingham did, where they had the court say it would be what the assessment was, and then some people did bond issues where they had a 0 assessment, and they're now involved in litigation, saying they owe no tax. And in some of that district is Birmingham's a lot of big industrial properties. So it's a huge amount of their maintenance benefit assessment in the district. So there are pitfalls. That's not exactly allowed by law. We've thought about it, but we've rejected it in the past, and now Birmingham proved it's true. But it really is, and the percentages are minute. Years ago, we would do it manually, which I can tell you was a nightmare. For a number of years, Burns and McDonald helped us with their IT people. It's all computerized now. And I'll give an answer to the earlier question because it's amazing what you can find on an iPhone these days. I looked at the statute. The statute says you have 1 vote per acre. Doesn't mean you can't make a vote. Each person has a percentage. And in our tax book, we have the percentage on every property.
Okay.
So
Yeah, because I was looking at it, yeah.
anybody would be allowed to vote. It might not be, it would be a percentage, but a lot of the properties are a number of votes plus a percentage.
Perfect.
So,
Okay. Do you have something, Councilmember Smith?
Yeah, just to follow up really quick. So if a parcel was unbuilt in 2008, like say there's a house there now, they're not paying anything into the levy?
they would be paying
Whatever the lot value tax was.
the value of the house. Also, it just stays the same. This is an old system. It's been in the law for a very long time. Really, most of the levy districts like this are in agricultural areas where there might be 10 farms, and it's a lot easier. when I describe it, when we did the bond issue some years ago, I fielded hundreds and hundreds of calls from people in the district about how the bond issue was going to work. And the easiest way to explain it, if you had 10 properties and and they were all worth 100,000, added up to $1 million, each property would pay 1/10 of both the benefit assessment that Leon's speaking about, and then when we've done bond issues, which is not that common, but when we have, it's also the same percentage as to the bond premium. But that has to go through hearings, publication, and a vote, and it received a very positive vote the last time it happened. But that's why we try to do it with some regularity, because it is unfair. If there's a house on it and it burns down, it's still at the rate before. But if you look at your tax bill, there are 2 levy items. They're really not correctly worded. We've never been able to get the collector to do it right. We've asked and asked over the years. Maybe with our new constitutional form of government, we can get that corrected. But one is the maintenance assessment, and the other is the bond assessment. And on almost everybody's tax bill, they're probably 2 of the smallest items on the tax bill. So.
So here's a summary of the district's expenditures from 2001 through 2020, and you can see that almost $16.6 million has gone to capital improvements. That would be the 2 under seepage projects that were done by the Corps of Engineers around 2013 and 2015. We spend about $2.3 million over a 10-year period on operation and maintenance, $2.1 million on engineering, and about $3.2 million on legal. So remember, this is all spread out over 10 years. 20. Okay, thanks for pointing that out, Miranda. Can't see without my glasses. Then this is the district's revenue. So we had about a $16 million bond to pay for the capital improvements for the Corps of Engineers. Over the last 20 years, they've taken in about $7.8 million from their maintenance assessment. And then the 2 sources of income didn't quite make it, so about $570,000 has been taken from its reserves. So the interesting thing about the district's spending plan and the spending history really starts in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina. And Hurricane Katrina and the loss of the New Orleans levees was really a catalyst for the Corps of Engineers, and we really started to see some change. So you can see that it took the Corps of Engineers about 5 years to really start getting new projects and figuring out what needed to be done with the nation's levees. So then around 2011 and 2013 is when the expenditures for the 2 large capital improvements projects occurred. The district had some money left over from the bond issue, and they decided to spend it on some upkeep of the levee. We put down about 60,000 tons of riprap along the Broadway extension and the main stem Missouri, and we've done some other projects with that money. This is a little bit closer up of that same graph, but you know what really is enlightening about this graph is that after the capital improvements projects were done, the levee district had to raise its maintenance tax. We had to, not only do we have to operate and maintain the under seepage systems, but the Corps is ever increasingly becoming more stringent and more observant, and always have higher expectations on how these levees are to be maintained. And so to do that, we cause an increase in the district's maintenance tax. The other thing that we really started to realize, especially after the 2019 flood, was that the levee district's infrastructure is over 70 years old now. And we've started to plan for failures and, because the infrastructure is just getting old. So they've been gradually increasing the maintenance tax to make sure that they have enough money on hand to do the maintenance that's required, but to also kind of plan for some replacement of the infrastructure over time.
You had said that we had to pull out of reserves. How healthy are the reserves? And is there a goal in mind of what you would like to hold back at this point?
Jerry?
As you know from being in local government, it's always a little bit of a moving target. We've budgeted about $650,000 the last couple of years. We're on a fiscal year June 30. So at June 30, I think we're going to spend maybe $100,000 less than we had budgeted this year, but we're anticipating next year we'll have to spend a good deal more. I would think our reserves realistically are between $800,000 and $1 million. We've tried to keep it in that range because of the cost of a flood fight. The district, some years ago, the Corps did a thing called the 7 Levees Project and looked at all the 7 levees around the Kansas City area, and we were by far the lowest expense of money on maintaining the levee. The levee district doesn't have an office, doesn't have a telephone number. Everything is contracted out, and so there's really no, everything that's spent is spent on something important to the levee. And the board's been able to do that by having contracts in place. But if we have a flood, like 93, when there's a great deal of expenditure required, that's why the board's felt it's essential to keep it, because the whole purpose of the levee district is a sole purpose entity, and that is to keep the levee in great shape and to maintain it great. When I mentioned that the lowest cost, the Corps said, well, how can that be? Because yours is about the best maintained of the 7 levees in the Kansas City district. So the board has always been extremely conscientious on maintaining the levee to the top notch. And Burns and McDonnell have been the engineers since shortly after World War II. And so they understand the levee. They can know if there's a little problem. That's something that we don't have to worry about that much, but even it's fixed. But they can always tell if there's a big problem. And we need to have the funds there to get at it. So that's been for quite a few years. We've tried to maintain in that range, so really since 93.
Go ahead. Is it me? Do we have a balance in the reserve fund? Do we know what that is right now?
We don't. There isn't actually a budgeted reserve fund because the time we receive our tax funds and our fiscal year is different. But I estimate that the amount that could be classified as reserves, it's really just in our various money markets and savings certificates of deposit and so on. But somewhere between $800,000 and $1 million would be, yeah.
Thanks.
For the sake of time, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. These are the top 20 shareholders or landowners within the district in no particular order. We'll talk about recent projects a little bit. That's a little bit more interesting. So, since 2014, we've done quite a bit of work on the riprap overlay. That's a picture of an excavator placing rock along the Broadway extension. You wouldn't believe the amount of rock it takes and what it actually costs. But the rock is important because it protects the levee during a flood. And riprap only lasts about 25 to 30 years. So it's it's a bit of a continuous effort to keep the riprap in shape. So we've done a number of riprap overlays project. We did the National Starch under seepage project. We've done the Rock Creek pump replacement. That was a pump that went out after 2019, and that was a joint project with the city. We had repairs to the Rock Creek channel. It started eroding away and taking some power lines. The channel started moving. So that was a project that we were able to get money from the Corps of Engineers through the rehabilitation project to get that repaired. We're currently working on an update to the operation manual. And the two projects that we have coming up are the Perkins under seepage levy. There's some system repairs that needs to be done on that. We've been trying to get money from the Corps of Engineers, but we were recently denied any rehabilitation assistance for whatever reason that the Corps provided. So that's going to have to come out of the levy district's budget to make those repairs. And we also have we've also noticed some problems with the outfall pipes at the Burlington pump station, and these are just normal wear and tear. You know, the pipes are 70 years old, and they just need to be relined. So we're keeping an eye on that, and are planning on those projects. Okay. So I remember I started doing this job about more than 25 years ago. So I was a young kid, and I remember, you know, at the time there was some animosity, I think, between the city and the levy district, and really didn't have a good working relationship. And I think when Richard came on board, there was more of an effort to reach out to our counterparts, because we truly are partners in the operation of the system. You guys might not know it, but your storm drainage system was designed by the Corps of Engineers as part of the flood protection project. So, you know, the backbone of your stormwater infrastructure really is part of the flood protection system, and at some point you just took over responsibility, and that's probably why you operate and maintain the pump stations. So there's a common goal, I think, between the city and the levy district, and that is just basically to keep the interior properties protected from flooding, you know, no matter what form it takes. So I think over the last 20 years or so, the partnership with the city has really been strengthened. And, you know, Miranda's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do with your staff to really help mitigate some of the risk associated with flooding in this community.
So in terms of operation and maintenance, the levy district is responsible for the operation and maintenance of the earthen levee, the flood walls, the closure structures, the hillside ditch culverts, which are Cherry and Holmes. Those routinely need cleaning and upkeep. The hillside ditch itself, the Rock Creek channel, and then we do our quarterly and annual inspections. So the quarterly inspections are done every 90 days. And then the annual inspection is done once a year with the Corps' presence, and they write a report. The city operates the 3 city pump stations and maintains them. The SCADA systems for all the pump stations. They clean the culvert at Ozark and do the maintenance there. The bridge at Harrah's and the grade control structure associated with that bridge into Harrah's Casino, and then the water line crossing up by Armour and Vernon. And then the joint partnership is really those 3 core pump stations where the operation and maintenance is done together. So the pump stations, the city really does the operation and maintenance of them, and they do a phenomenal job. Terry and team have been complimented by the Corps numerous times for how clean and well-kept they are. Then the operation and maintenance of the storm sewer systems. As I mentioned before, the city is the MS4 permit holder. The city does motor resistance testing on all the pump motors just to monitor the frequency that they may need repairs, and then crane load testing for all the cranes within the pump stations, as well as the SCADA systems. And then in terms of the inspections, in terms of the inspections that happen every 90 days, this is always a partnership with the city when we go out and do these, because we inspect every pump station, every crane, every pump, every wet well, and every gate. And so Terry and John and team are always present and helpful to do that operation for us so we can do those inspections. And then in terms of a Missouri River flood fight, the Levy District does the flood patrols, the operation of those under seepage control systems, and the closure of the BNSF stop log gap, and then any sandbagging that may need to take place. The city takes on, and in the past has always been responsible for the public communication, the operation of the pump stations, evacuation of Harrah's and the city, if need be, and any emergency response. And then a shared responsibility is just manpower and equipment for that shared goal of protecting the interior. So this is a graph of the Missouri River flood, or the river stage at the Hannibal Bridge. And you can see from 18 to 21, the biggest peak was in 2019, which I don't think is a surprise to any of us. But that was also the largest flood that we've had since 1993. And even at the peak, we were still in just a minor flood fight. And that minor flood fight resulted in several capital improvement needs following the sustained period of high water on the Missouri River. So that's kind of part of the planning and foresight into the future and what needs may come in spending. So then when a flood fight happens, the city and the district work together and have previously worked together to have routine coordination meetings to make sure we're all on the same page. Public outreach and communication is done as a joint effort through the city, but with input from the Levy District, same with communication. And then manpower support from the city departments. The city's always been super helpful in volunteering and providing support. And then the city is responsible for the evacuation of North Kansas City and Harrah's. When a flash flood response, this is more along the hillside drainage ditch. So its primary purpose is a tieback levee for the Missouri River. So when the water level comes up at the Missouri River, it will back up into Hillside. That was the primary design purpose. But it also serves a secondary purpose for flash flooding. And so during those flash flood events, the Levy District has always provided the materials and equipment for the 2 closure stop logs up there on Cherry and Holmes. The equipment and making sure it's in working order, and then we provide additional training to the city staff. The city, mainly the fire department, hosts the training, and we come down and provide that training. They monitor the conditions in that hillside drainage ditch, close the streets when they need to, and assemble those stop log closures. And then they also have typically deconstructed the closures, just because of the time for our staff to get up here and do that deconstruction would cause the road to remain closed for a period of time that's unnecessary. So really those closures are a joint effort, but the city's been great in helping, and the fire department has a good understanding of when those closure structures need to be set up. So as I mentioned, we conduct the training with the fire department. This happens every 2 to 3 years. We just did it last year in 2021. So we do both a classroom exercise, and then we go to the stop logs themselves and set them up with each A, B, and C crew. So I think I've pretty much talked about that one already.
What are they down to, about 10, 15 minutes to set these up?
Yeah, they're pretty efficient.
How frequently have they been used in the last 10 years?
You know, it really depends on the year. We've
Like
had a couple of
2019,
years.
for example, maybe if that was your,
2019 was a Missouri River flood,
Yeah, it wouldn't be
right?
the same, but I assume that also came with a lot of rain. That's why I said that.
2005, I recall, was a busy year. It seems like about every 5 years, they're setting them up a couple of times. And then we'll go for years where they don't have to be set up at all. So it's really just a function of the amount of rain you get here in North Kansas City. So like, you remember 1998 when they had the big rain that canceled the Chiefs football game? I do.
I was coming down the stairs.
That was one of the times that it got set up. We had a couple of times in 2005, I think maybe a couple of times in 2011. So the point is I believe the police department goes out about every time it rains, and they park a patrol car there to just kind of watch it. And the city's also installed some cameras in Mackin Park that I believe they turn around to watch it during a flood event. And we've got some reflective depth indicators that they can kind of look at and kind of gauge how deep the water's flowing. They've set them up a couple of times. I'd say maybe anywhere between 5 and 10 times over the last 20 years, but they've never gotten water up on the street. So they tend to err on the side of caution. So probably the other thing that's worth mentioning is the levee district has given the fire department carte blanche decision-making on it. So if somebody at the city makes the call that they need to be closed, they get closed. They don't really notify us until after it's done. We don't want to be a bureaucracy to that keeps people from setting things up. So
Yeah. Thank you.
And then lastly, or I don't know if it's last, but plan reviews are a big part of what we work together on. As part of the city's permitting process, they have a step in there that requires, and the district participates in the plan review of any project for construction within the critical zone, which is generally 500 feet landward and 300 feet riverward of the levee. But that can extend up to 1,200 feet in the PID. There is a clay blanket in the PID to help prevent under seepage. So anything within that clay blanket is subject to a plan review by both the district and the Corps of Engineers. Yeah.
okay. This is that same graph of the Missouri River stages in 2019. And what we found in 2019 is that when the river stage reaches 30 feet, which is still below the flood stage in Kansas City, you start getting water coming up out of the ground in the PID. So the main reason why plan reviews are important is because of the groundwater activity that you guys have during a flood. Because it does start bubbling up out of the ground. It wants to stay at about the same elevation of the river. So we do our reviews, and the Corps does it, to make sure that whatever construction happens doesn't impact the integrity of the levee system. So we look at how people trench, how they dig, how they excavate, how they backfill the holes that they put in. It's not our job to prevent projects from happening. It's just we get into a little bit of the means and methods of how people do things, just to make sure that they follow the Corps guidelines and that everything remains safe during a flood. So this is what it looks like during a flood. This is when this was still below flood stage. This is about 1,500 feet from the river. This is down in the PID around 15th Street. And the water is coming up out of the ground. And if you want to know where the lowest point in North Kansas City is, this is it. It used to be the ditches behind some of the warehouses on Warren Street. I think this hole got excavated to put in a storm sewer, and it is now the lowest point. So this is where the water is going to first come out of the ground. And you can see there's also a picture by the warehouses. You see the loading docks. That water is seeping up out of the joints. So that's just the groundwater coming up out of the ground. during a major flood event, and even with this one, we started seeing the pavement in the PID started getting squishy. Like you could walk on it and it would flex, and you could see water coming up out of the joint. So, part of the emergency action plan is consulting with the city to figure out when to cut traffic off into the PID so it doesn't ruin your pavement. So. Okay, one of the things that we try to be very transparent about with the city councils is what's going on with the Hillside Levy. And I think if you live in North Kansas City and you know a little bit about the Hillside Ditch, you probably are under the impression that it's too small, and it is. So when we did certification a few years ago, we weren't able to certify the Hillside Levy for a flash flood event. So the Hillside Levy, the primary purpose of that levee is a tieback levee. So it goes from the Missouri River and it ties back into the bluff. That's why it's called a tieback levee. So it runs along the bluff, and during the Missouri River flood, a 500-year, the water from the Missouri River backs all the way up to Cherry Street. That's the purpose of the levee, is to keep that water out. Its secondary function is to keep a rainfall event that occurs on the bluff, to contain it, keep it out of the city, and then it conveys it to Rock Creek. So there are two floods that we think about with that creek. So we were able to certify the major event on the Missouri River, but not the smaller event on Rock Creek. All right, so a little bit of a lesson in watershed hydrology here. So this is the Missouri River watershed. It's over 500,000 square miles. Right? It's a watershed that is subcontinental. It goes all the way up into Montana. Kansas City is near the bottom of the watershed where the star is. So there's a lot of watershed. So when you think of a Missouri River flood, what usually happens is, let's see if my animation works. You get a lot of snowfall up in Montana and North Dakota during the wintertime, and then it starts to melt in the spring, and it fills up the reservoirs at Fort Peck, Garrison, Oahe, Big Bend, Fort Randall, Gavin's Point. All right? Then you get to springtime. Everybody liking this? And you get these storms that come up into the plains, and they just kind of spiral in a big rotation. They drop a lot of rain. Well, the problem is the reservoirs are already full, and that's when the Corps has to start releasing them so that they don't lose the dams. And when they do that, they start sending a lot of water down the Missouri River. And what the Corps does, and what they did in 2019, is they had a lot of water and they spread it out for a long period of time. So you didn't get a major flood, but you got a long extended flood. And that's just the way the Corps manages the river. The floods we see here are largely controlled. They're artificial and they're intentional. So if you get an event on Rock Creek, those floods are caused by a storm event that pops up out in Kansas and kind of works its way across North Kansas City, and then they fizzle out. These are much smaller storms, but they're very intense. And so you never have a Missouri River flood and a flood on Rock Creek at the same time. They're statistically independent because they're so different in their nature. So that's kind of the difference between the two flooding scenarios that we have. A Rock Creek flash flood is going to be more common than a Missouri River flood. All right, so because we were unable to certify the Rock Creek event, this is what your flood insurance rate maps show. There's a note on there that says that FEMA doesn't exactly know where the flooding risk is within the interior. They didn't bother to go back and redo the calculations. They simply reiterated what was on the maps from the 1970s and put this note on it that said, hey, we're going to come back later and redo this. So anytime you have development up north along the Hillside Levy, you had to be cognizant of what the flood risk actually is. It's still a little bit undefined. But that was a consequence of us not being able to certify that levy. It just impacts your flood insurance rates. FEMA also came back and they had a model, and they had some locations where they predicted that levee would overtop. And one is to the west of North Oak in the water treatment plant. We have the 2 stop logs at Holmes and Cherry, so it's important that that those get closed. And then minor overtopping at Mack and Park. So you got to realize when they say overtopping, it takes about a 50 to 100 year to get bank full top of the levee. So that's still a big event. But and then you'll get a little bit of overtopping into Mack and Park is probably what would happen. And overtopping does not mean catastrophic failure. It just means water coming over the top. And it's not really a large amount of water either, because the water comes up fast and then it also goes down fast. So it's just something that we want you to be aware of, that this is out there. In the I don't think since 1993 it's ever overtopped or ever even has come close to overtopping. So a lot of these are just a prediction. So
Can I ask?
So what the levy district does? How am I doing on time? Yes.
There was some work not that long ago on Ozark on the levy
Yes.
and I'm assuming that was the levy district because Anthony didn't know anything about it?
That was the city.
That was the city.
So the city owns the culvert under Ozark, and according to the easement agreement between the levy district and the city, when they built that culvert, placed the responsibility of maintenance of that culvert on the city. So what we do is we clean all the culverts on a 2-year rotation, because they start to fill up with sediment and
Yeah.
debris. And so just to keep that ditch as clean as possible, to keep that water moving out, reduce the risk of flooding, we go through every 2 years and clean things up.
Okay.
The other thing that the levy district does is, we mow it, once a month during the summertime. And then in the wintertime, we go through and we clean out all the trees and woody brush that tend to grow up. So we do as much as we can to keep that channel open, because we recognize the problem, and we just want to get that water out as quickly as possible. So.
All right, Councilmember Saper.
Does the levy district also control the portion above the Kansas City, Missouri water plant?
There's the answer is truly maybe. We've tried to research what property the district owns to the west of North Oak. There are some drawings that the water department has that show an easement up there. We've never really pushed it with the city. We do maintain it. We kind of have a handshake agreement with the city about who does what in that area. So we'll go in and we'll do we have to hand clear it because it's too steep. So we do that a couple of times a year for the city. And then right now, I think they're up there. They're cleaning out the culvert, or they're cleaning out the ditch because they want to do that. You see, the federal levy ends at Cherry Street, right? And then the rest of it to the west that goes up all the way to Main Street, that's more of a pile of dirt, okay? It's not technically a levee, but it kind of functions as a levee. So I guess to answer your question is the property in that area is, I wouldn't say it's disputed. We don't really fight over it, but it's suspect who really owns it, whether it's the levy district or the city.
As a follow-up, is there an enhanced risk to the Kansas City, Missouri water supply because of that?
Well, we try to stay out of that. I think they've had some problems. We got a call, when was that, last summer? Yeah, if they get a good rain, it makes them nervous which is why why they came and asked us to, if they could clear out the channel and make it better. And, we cooperate with them to the extent that we can, because we drink all that water too. So we've met with the city on several occasions, and, we do whatever we can to accommodate them. So. That's the end of our presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Councilmember Smith.
So I appreciate you guys very much. Thanks for coming out and giving the presentation. Thank you for the nightmare fuel of the water coming up from the ground. I thought we were only worried about the bowl filling up.
That's a great picture. The videos are better. It's not really something you should worry about, but you should understand that happens.
Yeah.
Every time the water comes up in North Kansas City, you're connected to the river alluvium. Everything here is just sand and.
It even happens inside warehouse buildings.
Yeah.
Leon and I believe you were there. We were in a building on Warren Street
Yeah, one of
during
Belger's,
that
I
time.
think.
During one of Belger's buildings, and the water was coming up through the expansion joints in their floor.
God, that's terrifying. Well, thank you again for that. So thank you to the levy board, what you do. This is critical infrastructure. You're good stewards and protectors of the city. I did want to take a quick minute to talk about the voting process one more time. So I've got a memo from former city administrator Eric Berlin that says the process for election is set forth in 245.060. The board is elected by landowners of one or more acre of land within the levy district. Landowners have voting shares according to the number of acres of land. For example, an owner of 100 acres would have 100 votes. It's been asked how residents who pay the benefits assessment and the installment tax might have a voice in the district matters. As noted above, a property owner in the district must have at least 1 acre to have a voting share in elections. So I'd like to have a vote, like a vote as a resident, and I know some others have expressed that. So if we could take a look at this interpretation, make sure that we're doing it the right way. I don't know who would need to look at that.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, we have an annual, it's published, annual landowners meeting. It's earlier in the year, every year, I think. February, yeah. And I think I think we have fractions in the computer for every property. An acre is a vote.
Sure.
So if you had a half acre, you'd have a half a vote.
And I asked that follow-up question and was told no, that wasn't how it worked. And so that's why I want to clarify, because if you could check the record, did any residents vote?
I just took a look at the statute. The statute says 1 vote per acre.
Right, I got it right here.
But because we have fractional acres and we know how much they are, again, the statute envisioned, 100 acres versus 10 acres in a farm process. But we'll take a look at it. There may be some case law interpreting that differently. I'm not familiar with that memo. We'll sure take a look at it and get back to the city. I'll report back to Mr. Barzee. But I think a fractional would be. We have that annual meeting and, large numbers of and people can vote by proxy as well.
Sure.
They don't have to show up. Yeah.
Appreciate you.
I'd also add, if you have a concern for the levy district, they meet once a month.
They're public meetings, so anybody can attend. So if you have any questions or would like to voice an opinion, you're happy to attend.
If you could remind us when that is, though.
We post it. Where do we post that, Jerry?
Probably here.
Yeah, I think here.
It's generally the second Thursday of every month at the library at 12:30.
All right.
Yeah.
So watch for the flyer there.
Oh.
No. Go ahead. You have.
Any other questions?
Yeah, any chance you could use any IIJA dollars to do any of this maintenance going forward? Any of the bipartisan infrastructure dollars? I don't know if we've looked into that.
We've been talking about that. I'm not sure we can capture any of those funds right now.
Yeah, those are all
Yeah.
coming out of the state. We've tried to get some money from the Corps of Engineers. We couldn't get any rehabilitation assistance through that program, and they're kind of at a loss as to where some of the other ARPA money's coming from. So.
And I can tell you, when we petition the Corps, we don't take no for an answer very often, so.
Additionally, one frequently asked question is recreation. I didn't know if you guys want to touch on recreation on the levees.
Yeah, so our levee system's a little bit different than Riverside, and I actually ride a bike, and so, you know, there is a great risk to life and injury if you're on top of our levee system because of the amount of riprap we have. But generally, the board has looked at it as the levee was built for an intended purpose and not recreation. We have never had a plan submitted to us for any type of recreation that we could review. But if somebody would like to submit a plan to us, we'd be happy to look at it. Corps of Engineers would have to review it. But, yeah, I mean, there's been discussion about that in the past.
Yeah. No, that's just one I hear a lot, so I wanted to give you guys an opportunity there to comment on that.
Yeah,
Outside of that, you know, I've seen a lot of problems in Missouri, it appears, with some of these other levee districts and governance and stuff, and I really got to say, I really appreciate the work that you guys do in keeping this safe. Looks like you got a pretty clean operation over there in keeping everything safe, so.
Well, a lot of it depends on the city. So I tell you what, I've been on this board for over 20 years, and we've had great cooperation with the city. Over the past 20 years, public safety's been outstanding. We couldn't do it without you, and we'd like to continue that partnership in the future. So if you'd like to attend our meetings, we'd love to have you. You're welcome to join us. And again, thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Further questions? Seeing none. Thank you. Have a good night. Councilmember Saper.
Due to the late hour, I'd like to postpone the second part of the work session and piggyback into another time frame later on.
All right, that was Councilmember Saper's item, so I'll allow it to be punted to another time at the request of Councilmember Saper. With that, we will adjourn the work session and come back at 7:06 to begin. Kim's telling me something.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
When we go into adjournment, we're going to celebrate at the back of the room some cupcakes.
That's why I told her to say that, 'cause I'll never forget.
He did. The city's intern, Kyle Derringer, has graduated from KU with his Master's of Public Administration, and we wanted to kind of do a little something special for him to congratulate him. Rock chalk!
So there we go. With that, we will adjourn from the work session, come back at 7:06.